Hello, we're rolling into another episode of the DRH show. As usual, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and wellness. Today, I'm joined by a researcher. She's a postdoctoral fellow at Leibniz Institute for Resilience Research, Dr. Sarah Ayash. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here, Dr. Sarah Ayash. Obviously, for some of the people who've seen my previous episode, you were part of the resilience research and resilience panel talk. Obviously, I'm so immersed with how you shared your insights about resilience. So we decided to do a full-on interview with you. But if you could just remind us again of your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in genetic engineering, and then I did my master's in cellular and molecular neuroscience. And this was followed by a PhD in translational medicine with a focus on stress resilience. And right now, I'm a postdoc researcher with Leibniz Institute for Resilience Research.
Now, I understand, Dr. Ayash, that you've got really a biological background. So would it be safe to assume that when you try to define resilience, it's coming from a biological perspective?
Correct. Yeah. It's very important in resilience research to adapt a definition that the community agrees on to standardize how we investigate resilience. Our community conceptualize it as the maintenance or the quick recovery of mental health during or after adversity. I personally adapt this definition in my work, and what this implies is that stress resilience is the result of dynamic processes. It's not the result of insensitivity to stressors or being passive to stressors, but it does involve activation of adaptive mechanisms in the body. And this conceptualization is supported by the observation that individuals change when they are undergoing adversity or a stressful situation, which is also true, by the way, for animals as well. So even when the outcome is stress, or by our definition is stress resilience, there has been a process of change that the person went through. Some traits, of course, can increase or decrease the chances of one being stress resilient after a situation. This is it's okay to accept that, right? But in our community, we conceptualize that those traits act as factors on stress resilience mechanisms. So they are not stress resilience mechanisms or stress resilience for that matter. Yeah.
Now, obviously, you've been studying resilience from an academic perspective, but could you give us some real-life examples of research? Real example of resilience.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, individuals change when they are going through a stressful situation or encountering adversity. And this process of change can manifest as altered perspective on life, emergence of new strengths, or even what we call stress inoculation or stress immunization against future stressors. The idea of stress immunization is that just like the body has an immune system, which when we vaccinate it, what do we really do? We give the pathogen just in a milder form. However, it's mild, but enough to activate the immune response, but not to cross its tolerance threshold. And this becomes sufficient when we face the real pathogen. We're immune to the real pathogen, which is actually stronger than the one we took in the vaccination process. And the same idea for stress immunization, that we have a psychological immune system that actually gets stronger when challenged with mild stressors. Eventually, it becomes better prepared, let's say, to face real stressors, if I may put it like this, real or stronger stressors. Now, of course, in reality, there is no psychological immune system. Calling it stress immunization is very nice because it helps people grasp the idea very quickly. But in reality, this is a learning and memory process in the brain that trains the stress resilience mechanisms, eventually strengthening them.
And do you have any tips on how we can implement resilience within an organization? Say, for instance, a lot of us are working from home now, obviously because of the pandemic. So is there like a real life application towards, implementing resilience within, say, for instance, the workplace or working from home or even within schools?
Yeah, I think actually unpredictability can be very stressful to the brain. Actually, unpredictability can render a mild stressor as extreme or as strong. So since the pandemic, people work from home, I would encourage people to really have a routine, a daily routine. For basically how they go throughout their day, not to have it random, to try to structure it, and also to try to make it, diverse. So throughout the day to have different tasks, different activities to do. This is particularly also important for parents to create this kind of structure for their children who probably now cannot go to the kindergartens or have to do their education from home, to create a structure, to have a routine, but also to keep it diverse and to have different activities within this routine. I think also on the level of organizations, it would be helpful if organizations also, and many are, become sensitive to the issue of the mental health of their employees, independent of what kind of organization or company this is, to try to have a unit that the employee can refer to, can go to and ask for advice or for guidance. So just being aware that mental health matters for the productivity also of those organizations, matters for their success, and then to think of ways to improve it, to increase it, and to create a safe space for the workers, with this regard.
Absolutely. And I just want to touch upon what you've already alluded to earlier, Dr. Ayash. You said that controllability is an essential factor in promoting resilience. Can you cite any other factors that contribute to resilience?
Yes, there are some factors that have been reported in relation to resilience, such as humor, altruism, spirituality, mindfulness. So having a moral compass, sociability. This is particularly important and also close to me because I work with social stress. The opposite of sociability is social avoidance. And research actually suggests that in most situations, social avoidance precedes psychiatric disorders, rendering it as a potential predictive marker, or not predictive marker, but better to say risk factor that can precede psychiatric disorders. Other factors that have been identified also in relation to resilience is curiosity. Curiosity actually is very interesting because if we think about what is curiosity? Curiosity, or what is the outcome of curiosity? Curiosity urges you to put yourself in situations that are unfamiliar and that are novel. And the novelty can actually be mildly stressful. And this is in relation to what I talked earlier on stress immunization. This situation that is unfamiliar and thus is mildly stressful is enough to activate the stress response system, but not to cross its tolerance threshold. So what it does is that it really pushes you to try to cope with the situation. And by that, it's, so to say, training your stress resilience mechanisms. And we also know now from literature that curiosity is actually also found in relation to the stress immunization phenomenon. And we describe this kind of relation between it and between stress immunization as a positive feedback loop. The more stress inoculated you are, the more you dare to do to put yourself in novel situations. And by that, you activate your stress response system in a way that immunizes it, and so on. It becomes like a positive feedback loop. And actually, these findings are not unique to humans, but are also in rodents and non-human primates.
And could you talk us more about the role of social support in promoting resilience? I've read a few literature, in particular the one written by Anne Mastin, and she acknowledges the role of supportive family, the larger community. So I understand that you're really leaning towards a biological perspective, but would you say that you've also observed that within non-human animals? The role of social support in promoting resilience?
Yeah, I mean, of course, rodents and non-human primates are social species. So they live in communities, they have hierarchy within that community. This is actually what makes them suitable for investigations involving social stress. Actually, there's a paper in 2018 that suggests that social stress can alter the brain in a way that mimics certain mutations and even drugs. So it's really serious. This is why I think people should become more conscious and aware of the negative impact social stress can have on their mental health. And just as much as the opposite is also true. So having a healthy social network can be very beneficial and can be very strengthening of one's mental health. But precisely because of that, the opposite is also true. Being in a socially stressful situation, especially when this situation is chronic and is just you're experiencing it day after day after day, this can really alter the brain and can really have a negative impact on the brain. So I hope that people try to take social stress more seriously and to tackle it when they feel that the environment they're living in has a lot of it.
So, Dr. Sarah Ayash, you just spoke about the role of social support in promoting resilience. So I'm just wondering if you could also share to us some ways to promote resilience. I was just wondering if you've heard of any literature that talk about the pharmacological intervention about promoting resilience. So is there any other way to promote resilience?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there is research on pharmacological manipulations that can increase stress resilience. However, as you can imagine, this is not really easy to reach a point where we can administer those drugs and they give them to people. So we prefer, or at least I prefer, to focus more on practices that we can educate people on and basically train them to start including them in their daily life or when they are facing or encountering adversity. So one of those is actually what you mentioned earlier on controllability. So what does this mean is try to perceive the situation as a challenge and not as an out of control situation that would use all your resources. Now we know that it doesn't even have to be true, if I may put it this way. So perceived controllability is also enough to increase your chances in certain situations, of course, can also be enough in increasing your chances of stress resilience. And this is also interesting because it's conceivable to see this in humans, but we even know that this also exists in animals. If they perceive that they can control the situation, even though in reality they cannot, this can be sufficient for them to cope with the situation and to deal with the situation in a way that is, by definition, stress resilient. Other factors that maybe I can comment on is creating goals and seeking a growth. This is the healthy situation for the brain, to always be in a process of learning, and to always have a goal. It doesn't have to be saving the world. It can be learning a new language. It can be learning a musical instrument. This is enough to, it can be learning chess, of course. This is enough to train the brain and to keep it in a process of to not put it in a situation where it's pretty much dormant, if I may put it this way. Another thing actually that can also be practiced, especially now because of the corona situation and people having to work and to study from home, running is very beneficial for the brain. And the research suggests that running actually increases a process in the brain called the neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the process by which new brain cells are formed. And significant neurogenesis occurs during adulthood in many mammals in a region called the hippocampus. Hippocampus is a region that is responsible for learning, for memory, and actually is very important for how we respond to stress, and thus also to stress resilience. So running is a activity that people should consider actually adding to their life and to their routine, especially now during the pandemic situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dr. Ayash, I suppose you've been asked this question a lot of times, but what's the point of studying resilience? Why do we spend so much time studying about resilience? What's the real world application of this?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. Why we should study resilience is because after decades of research on stress-related mental disorders, we improved in their treatments, no doubt. However, we are still not able to reduce their frequency. Still, each year, more than 500 million person around the world is suffering from a stress-related mental disorder, be it anxiety, be it post-traumatic stress disorder, be it depression or addiction. So as resilience researchers, we are maybe asking the same question, but from the from the other side, from the opposite end. We find it more intriguing that actually people, the large majority of people, remain healthy after going through stressful experiences and after going through severe stressful experiences like war, for example. And this is what we find, if I may put it this way, more impressive actually, that people remain healthy after those experiences. And our thinking is that maybe if we understand what is keeping the brain healthy and strong in the face of these stressors, we can then develop better treatments for stress-susceptible individuals. Also, it's important to point out here that the field of stress resilience certainly overlaps and is complementary to the field of stress susceptibility, but they are not two opposite faces of the same coin. Stress resilience mechanisms are unique, and it's not simply just studying, studying the same thing just from another angle. What might be perceived this way is that we have a health-oriented approach. We are interested in studying health, whereas in stress susceptibility, researchers are interested in studying disorder and in studying disease. And of course, stress susceptibility research is very informative for stress resilience research. But as I said, in a way that is complementary, but not in a way that any of them substitutes the other one. Another thing that can actually be a very unique contribution by stress resilience research compared to stress susceptibility is that we might be able to develop new prevention strategies. And prevention can actually be more efficient and successful in reducing the frequency of stress-related mental disorders. Maybe it would be cheaper actually to train people and to develop prevention practices than to deal with the problem after it had occurred, and actually after it also had cost a lot of money, a lot of time, resources, not to mention the individual's life and the family members of that individual. So this is why I think we need stress resilience research, and we should give it a chance, especially now, as I said, that after decades of stress susceptibility, we fall short in reducing the frequency of those disorders. To give stress resilience a chance, maybe the health-oriented approach will provide answers that can help in reducing the frequency.
I really agree with what you said about, I'm trying to look for ways to, design a preventative intervention. If I may just share, because currently I'm doing a research about finding out whether we could use a blood-based intervention to promote resilience. And the ultimate goal of my research is to address suicidal behavior in developing countries. And yeah, what you said really resonates with me, that ultimately we're looking for ways to improve, mental health conditions, especially for vulnerable demographics. Talking about vulnerable demographics, I just want to find out if where, someone being coward, can they also be resilient?
This is maybe linked to what I commented earlier on curiosity. So to me personally, what does it mean to say someone is a coward? It means that this individual does not dare to put himself in new situations, in novel situations. And as I explained earlier, curiosity can actually be very beneficial for stress resilience and for mental health, precisely because it puts you in a situation that is unfamiliar. So individuals who are coward will not have this opportunity to train their coping strategies, because they seldomly would put themselves in a situation that is not familiar. Actually, there's a study on children from 2019 that showed that children who grew up in environments that are mildly stressful actually performs better than children, of course, who grew up in environments that are extremely stressful. This I think everyone would agree with. But what was very surprising is that those children were also mentally stronger and less anxious, and all these measurements that indicate stress resilience. So they were also more stress resilient than children who grew up in environments with very little stress. And the same findings were reported for adults. And I feel there's a bias that we always think of that too much stress is bad. And this is true, research agrees with that. But there is very little conversation, actually, and especially because we were talking now on prevention approaches, there is pretty much no discussion on the fact that also findings suggest mild levels of stress are better for mental health than low levels of stress. So, of course, the question here is now, what is the time window, right? So what is the dose? This is probably dependent on the individual, might even be dependent on the cultural background, on how a society functions. Do we have more benefits if this mild distress is experienced within childhood? Is there a right time window? This is still not answered. But what we know that this observation that mild distress is better than no stress as much as it's better than extreme stress holds true for children, whether the stress was experienced in childhood or in adulthood. And actually, again, because we were talking about prevention approaches, there is now stress inoculation training. It is given to individuals who are expected to act in the face of adversity, like nurses, like firefighters. And what it does is that it it should be enough to activate the emotional the emotional system of the individual. So the individual maybe is aware, of course, that this is a training and not a real situation, but should try to feel the stress that he would feel in a real situation. But precisely because it's not the real situation, the individual will now learn how to cope and how to deal with it. And this results in those people performing better in their professions once they face the real stressor. So back to your question on if coward individuals can be stress resilient, this also, for me, is linked to this paper that discussed different appraisal styles. And in this paper, they discussed that there are 3 different types of appraisal, and that those types are predictive of outcomes following adversity. So they propose that there is overly positive appraisal and there is overly negative appraisal, and then they call the halfway of that is the realistic individuals. So what does this mean? It means that the realistic individual, his appraisal style is to look at all the positive elements of the situation, but also on the necessary negative elements. So what does necessary means? It means the negative elements needed to find a solution and to deal with the situation better. Whereas overly positive individuals who practice this kind of appraisal, they only look at positive things and can even maybe be described as naive, because they refuse somehow to look at the negative elements that they might need for a solution. And the opposite of that would be overly negative, where the person, if I want to use a word we say in daily life, a drama queen, yeah? So when I hear coward, what I'm thinking of is really the 3rd type of appraisal, the overly negative appraisal. You expect the worst of everything, and so you do not dare to bring yourself to do things differently or to do things that are new. And by the way, animal research supports that these 3 different types also exist in animals. They're not yet referred to as appraisal, but it's easy to see the similarities between those 3 different types in animals and the appraisal types proposed by the authors of this paper. So to cut a long story short to your question, with all this in mind, I think, no, a coward person cannot be resilient. But I also think one should not be overly positive and thus naive, and maybe even put himself in situations that could be dangerous and anti-survival, but to try to always see all the positive elements of a situation and give attention to the negative ones that you need for finding a solution.
And what about self-confidence? How is it linked to resilience?
I'm not really well informed on the self-confidence research in relation to resilience, but again, I think if you are self-confident, then you do not perceive situations out of control, or more likely not to perceive them out of control. You believe that you have the enough resources to deal now with this situation, even though it might be unpleasant for you. Also, if you are more confident, I think you would also be more daring and thus more curious. And as we explained earlier, this is pro-stress resilience. So I personally see links of self-confidence with these other factors that have been identified as pro-resilience. But I'm not personally informed on literature that is specific to the question of self-confidence. For me, it is a question of controllability. If you're confident, you perceive that many things are under your control and that you can handle them and deal with them. And this is pro-resilience.
Your background is in genetics. Is there any research relating to genetics as to why there are some people, they seem to be born resilient, they're easy to, they find it easy to cope with setbacks, whereas other people, they seem to be struggling with coping? Is there any genetic underpinning with those differences?
So I heard about research in genetics now that actually what they're trying to investigate is what they refer to as like a transgenerational, where they see that if you grow up with resilient parents, are you more likely to be resilient, and can this be explained by genetics? This is not my field, so I'm not going to comment on it. However, I would be careful with saying the word born with. I think upbringing contributes significantly to how a person, to the mental health of a person in adulthood, and how a person deals with stressful situations and with adversity. Because during childhood, our brains are very sensitive to experiences, and experiences can result in reshaping our brains. So this renders childhood as a particularly critical period for mental health in adulthood. Of course, this is also a field on its own. What is a healthy upbringing, right? So are there, like, let's say, a set of rules that, if you do them, you're on the right track. If you don't do them, you're not on the right track. Again, as this is not my field, I'm not in a position to comment on it. But I want to comment on one of the theories in stress research that is called match-mismatch. The idea they propose is that you should receive an upbringing that matches the environment you're eventually going to grow up in. And this is the right way. So the way that matches the environment you're going to grow up in. So for example, if you are growing up in a society that is very unpredictable and very disorganized, then it is better to have a childhood. This is the hypothesis, yeah? It is better to have a childhood that would train your stress response system to deal with unpredictability. And the opposite is true. If you are growing up in a society that is very organized and to a large extent very predictable, then a healthy childhood in this society would be a predictable one and a one that matches the society. So I think, as I said, this is a hypothesis, but I personally, what I hear in this hypothesis is the importance of interpreting things in a context and not to look at them, from a very small tube, but to interpret behaviors in a context. Is this an adaptive behavior in this context, or is this the behavior per se? I think for many behaviors, we cannot say they are adaptive or not adaptive unless we see the whole context that this behavior is being expressed in. And this is what I hear in this hypothesis. With regards to stress research and childhood, this is a field on its own called early life stress. And I can only urge the viewers and the interested individuals to really look into this research and have a look, because it's very interesting. But I work with like the age group, let's say, that I work with is young adults, not with early life stress.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, you've spent a lot of time working within resilience research, so I would expect that you've come across with a number of misconceptions about resilience. So if you can kind of identify those misconceptions and sort of address them.
Yeah. I think most people underestimate their level of stress resilience. Most people say things like, if I go through this, I will never make it. I'll never come out of it, and so on. What our research suggests is that stress resilience is the norm. The large majority of people, according to statistics, will undergo or will experience at least one trauma throughout their life. And the large majority will be stress resilient. So this is the first thing that I wish people are more aware of, that stress resilience is the norm. When the person develops a stress-related mental disorder, this is the exception. Even though stress is a burden, yeah. And as I explained earlier, this is why stress resilience researchers are actually more intrigued that people remain healthy, because stress is a big burden. But if we look on the numbers, stress resilience is the norm. The other thing is stress resilience is a topic where everyone thinks that he can have his own opinions on it and his own thoughts on it, and they should. I'm not questioning that, but I feel very few people are aware that there is actually science behind stress resilience. There are institutes dedicated to investigating stress resilience. And I just would be, let's say, more happy, if I may put it this way, if people also get informed scientifically on the issue of stress resilience, and not only from personal experiences or from humanities, but to complement that with knowledge from science as well. The science tells us that stress resilience is a process and it's not a trait. And there are practices, as we discussed earlier, that one can implement to increase his stress resilience. So this also gives hope maybe to people who think because of maybe the childhood they had, that their mental health is not really good, and thus their chances of being stress resilient once they face adversity are little. There are practices people can do to increase their stress resilience. And maybe the other thing I would like people to know is that stress resilience is not unique to humans. A lot of what we see and observe and investigate exists in animals as well. And I feel this is something not really well known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because often when we talk about resilience, we tend to focus on, human lived experiences, PTSD, traumatic relationship. But yeah, that is a very crucial point, I think, that you made earlier, that we have to, strike a balance between, someone's lived experience and what actual science is telling us about resilience.
Maybe there are two things that I would like to share from my own research with the viewers on stress resilience. So I work on an outcome-focused approach and on a prevention-focused approach. So the outcome-focused approach, what I mean by that is I induce stress, and then I assess the outcome after inducing stress. Whereas prevention is, as the word suggests, to basically implement certain practices and to see if they increase the chances of stress resilience being the outcome. So for the protection-focused approach or the prevention-focused approach, this is what we discussed earlier. Stress inoculation, stress immunization. Don't be afraid of stress. Don't perceive stress only as a negative experience. Stress can be a very beneficial experience and can be very strengthening to one's mental health. Of course, when it's in the right doses and when it is also not chronic, yeah? So even if the dose is not too much, if it's chronic, this is probably also not healthy. But I hope what I wish for people to take from my research on the prevention-focused approach is not to be afraid of stress, and maybe also to see an opportunity for growth when they are going through a stressful situation. So this is the prevention-focused approach. For the outcome-focused approach, my work suggests that discrimination between threat-associated stimuli and non-threat-associated stimuli or context is critical for resilience and is a very important factor for stress resilience. So what does this mean? Maybe it's easier to explain what it means if I explain the opposite of it. So what is the opposite of discrimination? Generalization. If you are having a problem with a single colleague in the workplace, and this naturally will result in you being stressed and in you also having a response to this colleague. Maybe your response is that now you start avoiding interaction with him or her, yeah? Now, generalization would be to now generalize the problem you're having with this individual to every person you're working with in the institute. Everyone is bad, everyone is causing you trouble, you want to avoid them all. Maybe this will even generalize to the neighbors, to the family members, to the spouse. This is generalization. And generalization is a characteristic of stress susceptibility and a factor of stress susceptibility. The opposite to that is discrimination, which is to understand that my problem or my issue is with this single individual. It doesn't have to be individual. It can also be in a specific context. My problem is in this specific context, whereas everything else is fine with my neighbors. Everything else is fine at home. Everything else is fine with my other colleagues, and thus having the response only to the real source of the stress. So my research strongly points to discrimination as a very important factor in stress resilience, and I want to maybe use the opportunity of this interview to really encourage people to reflect when they are having a problem in a specific context or with specific individuals, to really reflect, are you now generalizing your response to this problem to other places and to other people where there is nothing happening? Because I think if you are conscious about this process, you would put a limit and a stop to yourself if you see yourself that now you're generalizing to situations and to individuals that are either non-threatening or even just neutral. So this is something that I'm very interested in my research, and I try to understand its underlying biology. A very classical example, actually, of generalization is post-traumatic stress disorder, where the individual is unable to stop his fear response. We always use the example of soldiers. If a soldier learns that in the war zone a red light predicts an explosion, then it is of course adaptive that the next time the soldier sees the red light in a war zone, he escapes or runs away. But this becomes maladaptive when the war is over, or they simply return back to their home countries where there is no war going on, and this response to the red light is maintained independent of the context that now there is no war. I'm not in a war zone, and so this response is actually not correct in this situation. Maintaining fear response and keeping fear responses active and not being able to terminate them, and then also to start generalizing them to every light you see and to every sound you hear, depending on the situation. This is maladaptive, and this can result in stress-related mental disorders, depending, of course, in the precise details of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, you just described to us the sort of trends within your specific area of research. Now, what do you think is the biggest challenge within resilience research?
I can answer that for my work on the prevention-focused approach, so stress inoculation, I would say the biggest challenge is for us to identify the right dose of stress that would be inoculating, because it is very likely that there is no one dose for everyone and for every situation. So if we wish to contribute as stress resilience researchers to prevention strategies, this is one of the questions we need to answer, or at least to have a better understanding of. What is the right dose? Where is the right time window that giving stress would result in stress inoculation, would result in stress resilience and in a better mental health, and not in the opposite? This is, I think, very challenging in stress resilience research, in the outcome, or in the prevention-focused approach or the protection-focused approach. For the outcome-focused approach, I think that animal models are really a treasure in helping us understand the causation. In humans, we can only assess correlation. We can only say that when people do those practices or have those traits or dealt with the situation as such and as such, they were more likely to be stress resilient or stress susceptible. This is, of course, relevant information, but the story doesn't end here. In fact, the story just started. Animal research allows us to understand what are the underlying mechanisms. And here I would say that the biggest challenge animal researchers now have is to model the human situation as accurately as possible. We need models that are translationally valid. This is the idea of animal models, to have them translationally valid, but we also need them to be ecologically valid for the animal. This is a challenge that researchers in stress resilience, and especially those working with animal models, have to face and to tackle if they wish to contribute something genuine and novel to stress resilience research, and eventually to improve humanity and help people with mental health issues, because this is the overall goal. This is why we're all here and we're doing what we're doing.
Now, Dr. Sarah Ayash, for those who want to follow your steps and they want to explore more about resilience research, can you recommend a good book as a starting point to understand resilience? So is there any like TED talk that you've come across that you think this would, kind of give a snapshot of what resilience is?
Actually, I mean, you mentioned Anna Maston's at the beginning. I think because I come from the, from science, I think a source that can be beneficial even to people who are not in science is actually scientific reviews. Scientific reviews on stress resilience differ from, of course, scientific articles on stress resilience. Scientific articles can have a very scientific language, and they can be also very specific on something very, let's say, small, maybe not small in its effect, but just very specific, detailed, very specific detail. However, reviews are more general, and I think their language can be comprehensible even for people who are not in science, and it can be informative on what is happening with stress resilience and where do we stand with stress resilience in the scientific community and from a scientific perspective. Because I think actually there is no lack in resources talking about stress resilience that are not scientific. And these resources are also very informative and they're very beneficial. I'm not questioning that. But I think it's also time, as I said earlier, for science to have an opinion on this matter and for the knowledge we have from science to reach the public. And this is, by the way, a responsibility on scientists too. We are not doing what we're doing for the journals and for publishing, articles and having libraries filled with books. The knowledge has to reach the public. And the knowledge has to be also in the hands of the public. It's not, science is led by scientists, but science, the knowledge from science is not only for scientists. It's not exclusive to them. It should reach the public. And I think, especially for stress resilience researchers, we are very privileged because our topic is a topic that the public is interested in and wants to know more of, and actually have even their own opinions and thoughts on it, be it from their own readings, be it from their own experiences, which actually sometimes can be also very informative to our work. So there's a responsibility on scientists too, to deliver the knowledge we have now to people who are outside science as well.
Mm-hmm. I really agree with that. So I'm really grateful that you took the chance, to engage with the public, because as you know, YouTube is, an effective platform to convey to the public what your research is about, enough for the intelligent lay person to understand what stress resilience is or what resilience research is. We're already nearing towards the end of our interview, so I just want to get a bit of the human side of Dr. Sarah Ayash. Now, as you've been mentioning earlier, stress and resilience are interlinked, so I'm just interested to find out, what's your distressing outlet?
What's my distressing outlet? Well, I talked earlier about the importance of, having a routine and having things organized and avoiding, or not avoiding, but trying to reduce unpredictability. I think my family and friends who would watch this would really laugh at this, because they always mock me for being too organized. But I think this is maybe my way of de-stressing. Even if I have 1 million things to do, as long as I know that things are in order and are organized and there's a plan, I am really, really relaxed about it. But once I feel there is no plan, even if there's just 2 things on my to-do list, this can be very stressful for me. So I am very aversive to unpredictability, and I like things to be organized and in a structure. And I really feel this. Like if I may put it this way, on the level of my brain, that my brain can handle it much better if things are planned and in organization. So this is maybe how I de-stress myself.
It goes back to what you said earlier about controllability, and I think that's a good way to manage stress if you know what's coming up. And finally, Dr. Sarah Ayash, what else is in the pipeline? Is there anything going on with your research unit? Any upcoming webinar? Tell us everything. And where can people get in touch with you? Are you active on social media?
Yeah, I think this year was a special year for everyone, and for stress resilience researchers and as well. A lot of the work that has been done was focused on the corona pandemic, especially from researchers who are working on humans. How did people manage and deal with the lockdown? I think this was a very unique contribution also, because of course naturally the attention regarding corona was mostly on corona itself and on physical health, but I think now people also became more aware that the decisions that the governmental decisions that are completely justifiable and understandable that has been put in place because of corona, such as lockdown, such as staying at home, working from home, limiting also social interaction. Maybe it was also beneficial in the sense of making people become more aware of their mental health situation and trying to seek information and in some cases help to deal with their to tackle their mental health. And so this was a very special year for stress resilience researchers. From my side, I put up-to-date information on my work and on our findings on my ResearchGate account, as well as, of course, ORCID, like any other scientist. And actually, since 2 weeks, I'm now obviously or apparently on Twitter. And actually for the very same reason that we were discussing just a bit ago. I realized that there's also a responsibility on scientists to be available in platforms where people can reach them and can reach their work and can exchange ideas with them. So now for 2 weeks, I am on Twitter, and I plan not to leave anytime soon so far.
Okay, brilliant. So, more researchers coming in on Twitter. That's news. Like what you've said, it's good to engage to the public, because we should not, limit or restrict research for the researchers. Now, Dr. Sarah Ayash, it's a pleasure having you here on the DRH show. Thank you for sharing your insights and expertise about resilience. I look forward to hearing more about your work. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.